Are you ready to get demonic? Today's episode features allegedly true stories about encounters with demons. Those things that can haunt your home, your life, and even the woods. So bury your inner demons for a while, ain't no one got time for that, and let's enjoy these creepy stories. If you have a scary story of your own and want me to narrate it, share it with me at darkstories.org. Also, check out eeriecast.com for more terrifying podcasts like this. Now, let's begin. Superstition or reality? From Returner 0173. I'd recently turned 28 years old and felt a sudden urge to look back on my life. There are people, friends, and teachers I wanted to see again. At least, it felt like that. But oddly enough, I don't remember their full names or their faces. Instead, I decided to look up family I hadn't seen in a long time, since immigrating to the United States. That's when I started to feel unease, as certain memories flooded back. My dad's family immigrated to the US a long time ago, which leaves my mother's side back in the Philippines. When I was younger, I would visit them during times when school was out of session. They live on the northern part of the archipelago, in a very rural area called Agoo La Union. The area is surrounded by rice paddies and tree lines that housed fish ponds that also transition to more rice paddies, and the home itself is 2 hours away by foot from the beach if you cut through the rice paddies. The exact memories causing me unease occurred during the only and last full year I'd spent there. It was right before our family immigrated to the US. Due to how the school system worked, despite having completed more advanced subjects, the K-12 system in the US would force me a year back. So the family decided I would go ahead and spend a full year with my mother's family in La Union, while they finalized the paperwork and while my mother settled things with her company. All my other visits prior to this had been great. The Spanish colonial style of home was made almost entirely out of some red-colored hardwood, and the furniture looked as though it had been made specifically to match the house. It felt scenic and more relaxing than the modern city life I'd been accustomed to. That made me curious. However, my grandparents and the family that lived there had one rule. Do not try to open a specific room on the second floor, and if you somehow find it open, do not remove the cover of the mirror inside. I never questioned this rule before, but this time around I had a full year, and I was 10 years old. I spent about 6 months, curious but no unusual goings-on. When I would pass that room, I would end up staring at the door. I'd ask my grandparents about it, but they'd just smile at me and tell me to ignore it. My grandparents are a mix of Spanish, Japanese, and Filipino. I shrugged the rules off as just superstition. The rest of the family told me to ignore it as well, but emphasized to avoid the room. 3 months before our flight to the United States, things would begin to change. One July afternoon, I had spent the day with the local kids climbing trees and getting bit by large red ants while trying to get at the sweet fruits called duhat, or Java plums, since everyone else was away doing errands and business. I believe it was around 4 p.m., or maybe 5 p.m., that I went back to the house as my grandparents and cousins were coming home. I ran upstairs to grab a change of clothes and a towel, since I spent most of the day sweaty and dirty. I turned right at the top of the stairs to go to this open area. It's kinda like another living room. There are sofas lining the 3 walls, and the windows right by them were open. I don't remember opening them myself before I left the house to play. There were 2 doors in there too. If you continue straight from the doorway after turning right from the top of the stairs, those doors would be to your left. The farthest door from the stairs is a room where I kept my clothes. The closer door to the stairs is the one we're supposed to keep locked. Well, when I went through the doorway, that door was wide open. It was the smallest room I've ever seen. It's almost like a closet, maybe slightly wider to fit a twin XL bed on the left side, but there wasn't anything in that room except at the very back was a mirror. I'm 5'11" right now, and that thing would have been at least 6'4", with the wooden frame and all. The mirror itself was shaped like an oval, but at this moment I didn't know that because there was a thick white cloth covering the whole thing. I felt drawn to it, but I remembered that I was not supposed to go in there. The longer I stared, the more unease I felt. I told myself to see if there was anyone else home, but my body wouldn't move. I was standing a few feet away from the entrance of that room, but my mind was racing. I knew I hadn't seen anyone on my way to the house and on my way up. I had to be alone. The more I realized this, the more the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Suddenly, I felt something grab onto my arm. I yelled, freaking out. But it was my grandmother, looking at me scared and worried. I think I may have seen some anger in her expression too. She moved her body so that the view of the mirror was obscured, and she asked me in a very stern voice, "Did you look into the mirror?" I looked around a bit confused. It was already dark out, but I had only come up here a few minutes ago, when there was still light out. I told her I don't know, that I had just got back in from playing outside. As she escorted me downstairs, she apologized that they came home a bit late because the place that hulls the rice we harvest had a problem. When I looked at the clock downstairs, it was nearly 8 p.m. Where had the time gone? I think she may have told my grandfather and my cousins, because they all went up together while I was eating dinner. I didn't do anything after that as I was still confused. By the time I went to bed, it was around 12 p.m. When I went back upstairs, that door was closed again. They'd attached something by the doorknob, and a chain was looped through it. This was to prevent the door from swinging inward and opening. That confused me even more, since that still meant someone from the outside could just undo the chains if they wanted to. But I guess they didn't think I was the one who opened the door in the first place. Aside from my grandparents' room and the room I keep my clothes in, which only had one bed for my female cousin, the rest of us slept on bamboo mats with a futon on top that we roll out on the floor of the living room-like area upstairs. There are 4 of us, ranging from 10 to 15 years old, and I was the youngest. My mind was occupied that night, and unable to sleep until sunrise, I only slept like an hour or 2 at that point before my cousins woke me up for good. But nothing creepy had occurred. For an entire week, it was peaceful, and I'd forgotten all about it. Then things picked up. Exactly a week later, during an event just after dinner, we were watching a show while relaxing, and I had to use the bathroom. The problem was that the house itself had no bathroom built in it. The house had a gazebo or an extended roof to the side. In a way, the front door is a side door, since the front that faces the gate and the road to enter the property has no door, just windows. Once you exit the front door, you turn left for a few feet, and right next to the house is a cemented staircase leading up to a door. This is where the toilet was. The height is about midway between the second and first floor. It's like walking up to a throne, which I always enjoyed as a kid. Above the toilet on the wall is a rectangular hole that opens to the backyard, where there was a large mango tree. Beyond that, it opens to a field of rice paddies. While I was on the toilet, I felt a chill. There was something primal inside me that made me sweat, despite the night being cold. That feeling of being watched coming from all over was prickling at my senses. I knew there was no way this was possible, as there's only one opening and it was right above me. I tried my best to act like nothing was happening, telling myself not to turn around or look up. I sat there, my nerves causing my body to shiver. I heard a sound that forced me to bite my lip until it bled, to stop myself from screaming. This sound was unmistakably like someone's tongue clicking, and it sounded deliberate. Each sound clicked in threes, separated by 2 seconds apart, and they grew harder each time. I was trying to finish as fast as I could, pushing the bidet multiple times. When I was finally completely done, I ran out as fast as I could. I'd forgotten to pull my pants up too. It was a miracle I didn't trip. My eldest male cousin, Eugene, looked at me worried. Everyone had gone up to bed while I was in the toilet. Apparently, I'd been taking too long. He was asked to wait for me downstairs. I couldn't explain it to him, but it must have spooked him, because he looked out the windows before shutting them. The windows there were made of small rectangular sheets that are lined up horizontally, like those horizontal blinds, and they close much in the same way. He urged me upstairs after shutting them, and did the same to the windows up there before we lay down to sleep. I don't know what time it was, but it was extremely dark. I woke up from this sound, like creaking. I was the second to the last spot closest to the doorway that leads to the stairs. Eugene was the last. I could tell the creaking was coming from the door, because in the entire darkness a light was coming off from there, and it grew more and more before the creaking transitioned to the floorboards. I felt a pinch on my arm then. It was Eugene facing me. I could barely see his face in the dark, but the moonlight coming through the now opened room made some of his features more visible. He looked afraid. His head shook side to side as though telling me not to look. He didn't speak, but the finger on his lips told me not to make a sound. He closed his eyes for several seconds, then opened them, telling me to do the same by nodding. No words were exchanged, but the way his eyes widened when the creak of the floorboards sounded louder and closer made it obvious. I began to sweat, my chest heaving, but I forced myself not to make a sound, and I closed my eyes tightly. The creak continued moving around the room. Eugene held my arm tightly to make sure I was still there, since he had closed his eyes as well. I kept mine closed, but the anxiety of hearing the creaking sounds moving closer made me tense up. My eyelids were beginning to hurt. I do not know how long it took. It felt eternal. There were no footsteps on the floors each time it creaked, but sometime later, clear taps, almost like a footstep but distorted, came from the ceiling, replacing the creaking on the floorboard. A loud metallic creak filled the room coming from the farthest wall. My eyes were closed, but my back was pointing against the source of the metallic creak. The cool breeze let me know that the window had been opened. The taps on the ceiling were right above me. Eugene's hand tightened even more, and I got a feeling that my other cousins were also awake now. They were normally messy sleepers, but they were dead steady. The footsteps on the ceiling stopped right above me, but I could feel that if I opened my eyes, something would be staring right at me, and it made me want to scream. I could feel the breeze from the now open window against my back, and there was a cold brush against my cheek. Then the tongue clicks returned, and they were loud, as though whoever or whatever was making them knew we were awake. It came from behind me, and the sound of something hollow tapping on the glass pane came too. As I mentioned, the walls were lined with the sofa, so right by our head a sofa separated us from the wall. The two windows lining that wall right above us creaked. The smell of tobacco hit my nose, followed by sulfur and ammonia. From that same window, I could hear heavy breathing each time the tobacco smell surged. The leaves of the mango tree by that window shook like something was moving the branches. The tongue clicks behind me, the tobacco, ammonia, sulfur smells, and heavy breathing right by my head seemed to go on forever. I was not in the right mind to keep track of time, but I know for sure that it would be a while before the floorboard creaked again. I heard cackling from both directions out the window, then felt an unmistakable cold hand grasping my right ankle. Eugene squeezed my arm then. I guess he could feel me become more tense, and I tried to remain calm, but I soiled myself then. After that, I'm not sure what happened. I know that I spent the entire night awake. When the neighbors' chickens crowed, Eugene sat up, followed by the rest of my cousins. They were all drenched in sweat, and so was I. Being boys, they would have surely made fun of me for soiling myself, but they didn't. It was still just before sunrise, but there was enough light for us to move around now. We turned on the lights and ran downstairs as a group, all scared but relieved. The locked room was wide open, and the mirror had no covers on it. When I came around to look sometime later that day, the window panes had scratch marks that weren't there before. The ceiling had scratch marks on it too. My uncle and Eugene were trying to fix the door. Apparently the knob had been completely wrecked, so I was able to see inside while they were trying to fix it. The floor by the mirror, when I first looked in the room, there weren't any scratch marks, but now that floor was covered in them. This experience would continue on, deferring intensity for the rest of the time I was there, especially the feeling of being watched. It stopped feeling like that for a long while since moving to the US, until I remembered it all recently. Since then, I feel creeped out at night, especially when there's a large mirror and an opened window. But it's summer here now, and it feels extremely hot. Now and again, dreams that feel too real about something coming out of a mirror when I'm alone plagues me. I don't know anymore. Is it just suggestive superstition, or was it all real? "9 Months of Torment" from Anonymous. Let me begin by saying it's out of my element to write about personal experiences of any kind. I tend to avoid thinking about them for the most part. Now, I grew up hearing voices, seeing or being followed by things that I couldn't put into words, and so as I got older, I would self-medicate with certain substances, as one tends to do when they don't want to face their reality. I say this because it all ties together for this story. I've made many mistakes and I've paid dearly for them. One of these grave errors led to me being sentenced to a federal prison. If you saw me in person, you'd never think of me as a felon or criminal, but many people that find themselves in a similar position rarely look like what you think they would. I went to a federal women's prison camp in Kentucky, which was adjacent to a high-security men's prison. When you think of prison, you think of cell blocks and barred doors. But in reality, a camp offers you a lot more freedom. We weren't behind a barbed wire fence or barred doors that automatically close you in. There were communal bathrooms, and for the most part, you had free range of the camp, although there were set hours you had to be in your room for counts, etc. A count is when a guard goes through the entire facility and counts you so they can make sure there are no inmates escaping, missing, out of bounds, etc. I came in during the height of the Rona, so a lot of the programs were shut down, and there wasn't much to do but sleep and hope for a good work assignment, which would help you pass the time. My first experience wasn't as horrifying as my others, but it was still very unsettling. At the time, I was of course on edge. I was entering a prison with other women, forced to live in a tiny room with 12 other people that you don't know, and who was to say what they were there for or what they were capable of to begin with? I was sleeping on the top bunk, which was next to the wall, with my back facing the room. One night, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I assumed it was someone asking me something, or trying to offer me something, as some people there would offer to try to peddle smuggled cigarettes or pills in exchange for commissary items. So I pretended to be asleep and ignored it. Something tapped me again. I groaned and turned around, waiting for my eyes to adjust, but no one was there. I swung my head down to look below at the inmate sleeping under me, expecting to find them giggling and being childish. I assumed someone was trying to haze me, as I was the new inmate in the room. But she was sleeping softly, snoring along with everyone else in the room. As you can imagine, it's not a quiet place, even in the middle of the night, with everyone sleeping around you. I turned back over, trying to fall asleep. Right as I felt myself fading out of consciousness, something which felt very much like a hand forcefully placed its palm on my shoulder instead of the light taps I felt before. This jolted me awake, and I turned to nothing again. After that, I never slept with my back facing the room again. It was always strategically placed against the wall, so I wouldn't be tapped or grabbed anymore. Now, although there was access to substances at this facility, I was sober and very clear-minded. I'd finally made the decision to get my life together, but I'd almost forgotten what sobriety also brought back into my life. After gaining some bearings and observing my fellow inmates, I felt comfortable enough to ask someone what they may have experienced in this facility. I was told the camp used to be an old drug farm back in the 1920s, where people that maybe smoked up a little would be admitted involuntarily and subjected to torture-like experiments, such as getting them addicted to other substances and then taking it away to see how they would react. Many people died, and the basement of the facility, which now housed the gym and the library, used to be the morgue. My next experience was a shared one. I was growing restless, and with my newfound sobriety, I wanted to get healthier in different ways. I wanted to start going to the gym. I found someone closer in age to me, and we started to work out together. The basement was sort of separated in different wings with the main common area for the library. Pretty much anywhere you went, you could find a group of inmates playing cards somewhere. There was a group in the common area, and the gym was down the wing. We would close the doors to the hallway as the women playing cards were usually loud and excited about spades or rummy or whatever they may have been playing. Another girl and I were lying on the floor on a yoga mat, waiting for our next set to begin, when the lights started to flicker on and off. This was an old building. When lights flicker, I don't assume it's something supernatural or paranormal. I assume the place is falling apart, and they refuse to fix anything, so we ignore it. We keep working out, then again the lights flicker while we're resting in between sets. We certainly heard a D-man's cackle. It sounded sinister, and the lights went completely dark while we were lying on our backs on the floor. It was so dark, in fact, you couldn't see 2 inches in front of your face. That's when we began to get scared. We froze there for a moment, not saying anything because we both didn't want to acknowledge the man's voice. There were guards in the facility, male guards as well as female, but they were serious and not to be spoken to or messed with. They wouldn't play pranks on inmates. The lights finally came back on after what felt like hours, but it was probably only about 2 minutes, and we ran out of the gym then into the common area where the women were still playing cards, like nothing creepy had just happened. We asked them if they flickered the lights on and off, or if they lost power in this room too, but they just looked at us confused, slightly annoyed too that we were interrupting their game. Time passed and more small incidents kept occurring, but it almost reminded me of my childhood, how I just kind of had to get used to it. One night I woke up having to go to the bathroom. It was probably close to 3 a.m. I got my toilet paper and walked to the communal bathrooms, which had some stall doors on them. Some only had shower curtains to block them. Some stalls had nothing, and people used them anyways. Prison takes away lots of things, but one of the most treasured that you don't even think about would be privacy. While I'm using the restroom, I hear footsteps enter the bathroom, and the rustle of the shower curtain being moved. I'm not concerned at this point, more so curious, because it's rare for people to be up and moving around at this time, especially so close to count. But I just assumed they have to use the bathroom just like me. My curiosity led me to bend down to peek at the feet of my neighbor. But when I do, I see almost blackened feet, crusted with a dark brown, gooey substance that looks like blood. The toenails were cracked and bleeding. The heels were scarred and hardened. This was not normal. It was common sense to make sure no matter where you go within the prison, you wear shoes, as you could get athlete's foot, especially in the bathrooms. And even so, why did this person's feet look like this? They must have been in agony. It took me a minute to register what I was seeing. I looked up, kind of confused. Then this deep sense of dread washed over me, and I felt extremely heavy. I looked back again, at my neighbor's feet, but I didn't see anything. No one was there anymore. I quickly ran back to my room, silently praying the thing with the mangled and bloody feet did not follow me into my cell. Things kept happening to other women. You would hear the stories that were passed down to one inmate to another, which were always embellished, and you could tell when someone was adding something or flat out lying, just to tell a story, as a woman's prison is a very gossipy place, for the most part. I met this one girl who was fairly new. She had been designated in this area known as the bus stop to sleep and essentially live with about 40 other women in a common area on the other side of the camp. She looked ragged, like she hadn't slept in years, but she was so young. She told me one day that every time she fell asleep, she felt something hold her down by the throat, and it wouldn't let go. That's why she never slept. Although this isn't part of my story, I could tell something was tormenting her. She looked broken. Someone so young. Obviously, she had made a mistake or two to be here, but still she had a life left to live and a chance to change. But she looked just absolutely broken. After some time at this facility, I got a good work assignment that allowed me to be moved to a more private 2-man cell that was very coveted, but only available for early morning outdoor workers. I was happy to gain more privacy and only have to deal with one other inmate as a roommate at the time. She was an older woman that, from what I understood, had been sentenced to prison for murder for hire as she tried to hire someone to get rid of her abusive husband. She was kind, but a little odd. She, for the most part, could be found playing cards with her group of friends. At one point, she got the Rona and had to be moved to a different wing to quarantine. Now, it sounds horrible, but I was so excited to have a room to myself for 2 weeks. She was in good health and not in any danger of getting sicker, but the idea of just being able to change freely and sleep without being awakened by someone else was awesome. This sliver of freedom made me feel so happy, but I probably slept 6 hours total in those 2 weeks. Anytime I tried to sleep, my bed would start to vibrate. The entire bed just shook uncontrollably. It was so scary because it wouldn't stop even after I woke up. I would see shadow figures on the wall from the hallway. I felt like I was constantly being watched, and I just couldn't fall asleep for fear of being shaken awake. Towards the end of my sentence, I had been there for about 8 months, and I was due to be released in a month for good behavior. I had a light sentence and was feeling very excited for my newfound sobriety and fresh start once I got home. I had a dream. I've always had dreams that one could say are almost like a fever dream, and somehow end up coming to fruition, or like a feeling of déjà vu for me. In this case, I had a dream that I was home, the best kind of dream. I was home and I was sleeping in my big comfy bed when I heard a gunshot. I woke up in the dream and I looked around. My partner, who I was still with while imprisoned, was gone from my side. I went frantic in the dream, looking all over the house for him and then the garage. When I got to the garage, I saw a body lying in a puddle of blood, but it was behind the car, so I couldn't see anything but the knees down. I woke up in real life, crying uncontrollably, which is not common for me as being in prison kind of made me very unemotional. I didn't feel comfortable crying or showing any sort of weakness there. But I couldn't stop. I was horrified. I had to call my significant other. I had this horrible feeling in my gut that something bad happened. We have specific phone times. We can only use the phone within our specific wings or blocks time, because of Rona mostly. But it wasn't yet our time to use the phone. I begged one of the counselors to use the phone, and for the most part they would normally say no, but I think he could see something was wrong in my eyes. He could tell I needed to use the phone, and he allowed me to. I quickly called and confirmed my partner's safety. I promised I'd call later during my phone times, and just hearing their voice and knowing they were okay was all I needed. I went to talk to a group of girls that I had befriended during my stay, to just get this off my chest and move on with the day. One of the girls that I was friends with was in the office, which is usually serious. We found out it was a family emergency, so we waited for her to come back, then we could be supportive. Nothing is worse than seeing someone lose a family member in prison, not being able to be there for them. I've seen women lose children, and the wailing cries and screams you can hear throughout the camp is one of the worst sounds I will ever hear in my life. We were waiting for this friend when she comes out and just bursts into tears. She said her brother had shot himself in his garage. When I eventually told the women about my dream, they turned and looked at me, shocked. Apparently, what I had just described to them was apparently what had happened. We all went into overdrive, trying to comfort our friend while thinking about the dream at the same time. Prisons have a lot of history, and I think it's safe to assume there's something nefarious going on in most of them beyond the realm of the living. I've been out for over a year now, and my life is completely turned around. I'm sober, and occasionally I have instances where the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, but I take it as a warning, and I follow my instincts instead of trying to drown them in substances now. Although all of these experiences were horrifying, I didn't feel like I was ever in grave danger. For the most part, it felt like something or someone wanted to be heard or acknowledged, but there was something else there that was more malevolent, something that seemed to feed off the sorrow and pain of the inmates, something lurking and watching, always watching. Demonic Lady, from Rosiegonerosie. I was around 8 years old when this happened. I had been living temporarily with my aunt, uncle, and their children, or my cousins, at the time, for reasons I will not go into. I remembered I'd been sitting on the bottom bunk. I was reading one of my favorite books at the time. I never really felt comfortable being in a room by myself when I was younger. I always felt there were these presences in the same room as me. My parents had always chalked it up to me being clingy or having a bad dream. But on this occasion, the air went still, and I had this weird feeling that something or someone was watching me. So I shut the book and looked up. My heart began to pound like a drum when I saw who had been watching me. It wasn't a who, though. It was more like a what. A demon-like pale white figure was staring at me from the top bunk. Chills filled my body, and I was paralyzed with fear. I shivered, not from being cold. It was from the huge amount of fear I was feeling at the moment. This woman had pale white skin that was the color of fresh snow. She had raven black hair, and her entire eye was black, like a demon's from one of those supernatural TV shows. She opened her mouth wide and showed off her sharp teeth, which resembled what a carnivore's teeth would look like. Our staring contest we had seemed to go on for a minute or two before the demonic-like creature began to speak.
Do you want to play a game?
The creature asked in a distorted voice. I shook my head, terrified. The creature growled, and it seemed to lunge at me. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, that demonic woman, more like creature, had vanished into seemingly thin air. It should be impossible that someone or something could just disappear that quickly. I shoved my book to the side and raced out of the room. I told my cousins and siblings what I witnessed. They assumed it was just my overactive imagination. I'm 18 years old now, and I still think about it every now and then. I tried to research what the creature was, but I had little to no success. Hopefully it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Whatever it was, I certainly don't want another encounter with whatever the heck it was. If it hadn't disappeared, well, it would have eaten me, I guess. And that makes me feel rather unnerved. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to EerieCast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.